Right. Good morning. My name is Councillor Stephen Holliday. I'm the chair of the Service Excellence Committee. The clerk has advised me that we have quorum, so I'd like to now call our second meeting to order. Welcome, everyone. Today's meeting is being held by video conference and in person at City Hall in Committee Room 2. This meeting is also being live streamed online at youtube.com/Toronto City Council Live. Although we may be meeting in different locations today, the committee would like to acknowledge that the land we are meeting on is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. If you are registered to speak today at today's meeting, please listen for me to call your name. I will call speakers in the order that they appear on the list. Rules for public presentations to the committee are outlined in Chapter 27, Council Procedures, Article 4, titled Public Participation. The list of speakers can be viewed online by visiting the Service Excellence Committee page at toronto.ca/council and clicking the speakers box for today's meeting. Members, the City Clerk has provided all agenda materials on toronto.ca/council and on CMP, the Clerk's meeting portal. Clerk's IT staff are available to members if you need help with your devices. I also want to remind you to please submit and approve your motions by email. Staff are available at svex@toronto.ca to help with motions. And a special request of Councillor Ainsley, I've got you on a little square here on the screen, so do your best to wave for my attention. Thank you. Are there any declarations of interest under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act? If you do have an interest, please raise your hand and unmute your mic. Seeing none, we will proceed. If members have any motions, they must be submitted in writing to the clerk. The clerk's staff are available at svex@toronto.ca to help with motions. May I have a motion to confirm the minutes from our last meeting on December 18, 2023? Councillor Cheng moves. All those in favor? Any opposed? That carries. And we can begin our agenda. The first item is SE 2.1, Customer Experience Division Annual Report 2023. We'll hold that item in my name as there are registered speakers. The second item is SE 2.2, Complaints and Compliments, Process Enhancements. We'll hold that item for a staff presentation, and we have a speaker registered. The third item is SE 2.3, 311, Reporting and Dashboards. I'm going to hold that item so that the staff can make a display or a demonstration of the dashboard. With that, those are the three items. We will now go back to the top of the list, and we will commence with SE 2.1, Customer Experience Division Annual Report 2023. We have two speakers registered. The first speaker is David Shelnut. Good morning, Mr. Shelnut. Welcome to the Service Excellence Committee. You have 5 minutes to speak to the committee. Please proceed when you're ready.
Morning. My name is Dave Shelnut, Managing Partner of the Biking Lawyer LLP. We are lawyers for injured cyclists, pedestrians, and other road users. I'm here today to address a failure in service and an unanswered request. Councillor Holliday, not only have you failed to answer our letter raising serious community concerns.
Mr. Shelnut, can I just ask you to pause? It's my obligation as chair to ask you to please stick to the subject material of the report in order to main order of the meeting.
My comments today are related to the topic of the current discussion. There are many headings in the report. Under the report, there's the partnership heading, which talks about bicycling safety. And so my comments are related to the safety of cyclists in the city and their ability to forward complaints.
I understand, Mr. Shelnut. I just will ask you to remain on topic of the report. Please proceed.
I will proceed, and we'll go from there. On February 28th, you organized and presided over a terrifying display of anti-cyclist rhetoric. The event met its pinnacle when a member of the crowd speaking at a microphone in front of you said
Mr. Shelnut,
that he would
may I
run
ask you
over
to pause,
cyclists
please?
with his motor vehicle if they got
Mr.
in his
Shelnut,
way.
may I ask you to pause your speaking? I need to remind you that we are, thank you, Councillor Perks. I need to remind you that we are here to listen to your comments about item 2.1. I'm asking you to please stick to the matter before us today. If you cannot confine your comments, I will end your time and ask that you submit the rest of your comments to the committee in writing. Are you ready to proceed?
As always.
Thank you. Please go ahead.
Instead of an urgent and loud rebuke from you, this man was met with cheers from the crowd.
Mr. Shelnut, can I
He was
ask you
permitted to
stop?
continue speaking and continued his remarks unimpeded,
May I ask you to stop, please?
without any condemnation from you, Counselor, or anybody else.
Mr. Shelnut, I'm reminding you again that we are here to listen to your comments about the topic. I'm asking you to please stick to the matter before us today. If you cannot confine your comments, I will end your time and ask you to submit the rest of your comments to the committee in writing.
We have a public complaint here.
Are you ready to proceed?
Yes, I am.
Okay, please go ahead.
We can disagree on the appropriateness of the placement of bike lanes, Counselor. However, when that debate turns into veiled and open threats against members of the public, your constituents, the time for discussion ends.
Mr. Shelnut,
Action
may I
must
ask you
be
to pause,
taken.
please? I've warned you twice before about confining your comments to the matter before us. I'm ending your speaking time now and asking you to take a seat in the public seating area. You can send any further comments to the clerk by email. Members, I'm going to recess this meeting and reconvene when order has been restored. I'm ordering everyone to leave the committee room. The city clerk will notify members by email when the meeting is to resume.
Oh, I don't want to inconvenience staff members. We actually care about their well-being and their time.
Sergeants at Arms, please clear the committee room. Members of council, staff, members of the public, and members of the media must leave the committee room while the meeting is in recess. This meeting is now resumed. We are on topic SE 2.1, item SE 2.1, Customer Experience Division Annual Report 2023. We have a registered speaker. The next speaker is Jessica Speaker. Good morning, Jessica. Welcome to the Service Excellence Committee. You have 5 minutes to speak to us.
Thank you very much.
Please begin.
My name is Jessica Speaker, and I'm here to speak on behalf of Friends and Families for Safe Streets to address the level of customer service excellence provided by you, Councillor Holiday, to your constituents and to all people who bike, roll, and walk in Toronto. In particular, I, and doubtless every other victim of road violence, was appalled to see you entertain a resident's expression of his desire to run over a person on a bike and perhaps kill them with his motor vehicle.
Ms. Speaker, may I just pause? I have to remind you that we are here to listen to your comments about item SE 2.1, Customer Experience Division Annual Report 2023. I'm asking you to please stick to the matter before us today. If you cannot confine your comments, I will end your time and ask you to submit the rest of your comments to the committee in writing. Are you ready to proceed?
Yes. What this resident said was, personally, I'd like to run them over and get them out of my way, and you did not denounce that. Let me tell you what happens when a driver runs over someone with a car. They usually die. If they don't die, their life is ruined. Their bones are broken, their soft tissue is mangled, their spinal cord might be severed, one or more of their limbs might be severed. They'll live with relentless chronic pain, they'll suffer the debilitating impacts of PTSD, and very likely will suffer a life-altering brain injury and may even require lifelong care. That is what happens when a driver runs somebody over. That is the real-life, direct consequence of the customer service excellence provided at your meeting. My own brain was too damaged in my crash for me to remember anything, but as that 5,000-pound SUV hurtled towards me on May 20th, 2015, and it became obvious the driver was going to slam it into me, and I screamed for my life, or so the witnesses said, I'm sure I was making note of the level of excellence of customer service I was receiving from the city and in part from you because you were in power at the time. I have certainly noted that level of customer service excellence every single day of the 3,227 days that have passed since. On May 28th, 2023, less than a year ago, Kyle Shreve, a 37-year-old man, was struck and violently killed on his bike in your ward on Scarlett near Braeburn while he was riding his bike. He unarguably did not receive customer service excellence from you, his counselor. His death was completely preventable, but you consistently opposed cycling infrastructure, especially on arterial roads like Scarlett. His family had to plan a sudden funeral, and his friends...
Can I just pause you for a moment? I am reminding you again that we are here to listen to your comments about the item SE 2.1 Customer Experience Division Annual Report 2023. I'm asking you to please stick to the matter before us today.
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
Point of order, Councillor Perks.
I'm looking at the staff report on page 7 under the heading Bicycle Safety SR Category Improvements. It reads, CXD collaborated with councillors in the Toronto Centre Cyclist Group to improve the online SR category related to bicycle safety concerns. Changes were made to improve the overall experience for cyclists, including updating cycling-related resources, creating a new subcategory for bicycle safety issues and concerns, and grouping cycling-related SRs together, making it easier to identify appropriate SR related to cycling. The report in front of us explicitly talks about how cyclists communicate about safety issues. So in my view, you are mistaken in ruling this as not relevant.
Thank
I'd ask you to rule on that.
Thank you, Councillor Perks. I'm familiar with this section of the report and will rule accordingly. Ms. Speaker, I'll just finish the end of this.
What's your ruling on my point of order?
Thus, on your point of order is that there are some comments that are in order and there are some comments that are not.
I've asked that you rule on whether this particular deputation is in order.
There are elements of this deputation which I find out of order.
I challenge the chair.
Okay. Councillor Perks challenges the chair. Should the chair be upheld? All those in favor? Any opposed? Okay. There we have it. Ms. Speaker, please continue.
Thank you. Kyle Shreve's death was completely preventable, but you consistently oppose cycling infrastructure, especially on arterial roads like Scarlet. However, Kyle Shreve may have inconvenienced a driver slightly, and his statement, your resident statement, personally, I'd like to run them over to get them out of my way, may have applied, so perhaps the driver was justified in killing him. It's not at all difficult to imagine the same attitude being extended towards people on foot who can pose just as much, if not even more of, an inconvenience to a driver as someone on a bike can. In fact, on August 11th, 2020, a woman in her 80s struck and killed a 3-year-old boy in your ward, injured his father and older brother. Perhaps you would excuse that driver because 3-year-olds don't walk fast enough, so they inconvenience drivers, and the statement, personally, I'd like to run them over to get them out of my way, applied. Residents complained that Montebello Gardens, on which this collision took place, was a speedway, and you could have addressed that by pushing for speed calming Vision Zero design upgrades, but instead a child was violently killed and a family was shattered as a direct result of the level of customer service excellence you provide to your constituents. I could go on all day with stories of horrific violence unleashed in your ward, Councillor Holladay, but I will keep this short. I'm sure every family whose loved one was killed by a driver notes the level of service excellence you provide them when you staunchly oppose every concrete instantiation of Vision Zero that could prevent future deaths because it might add a moment to a driver's commute. I hope all victims of road violence who live in your ward are aware of the level of customer service excellence you demonstrate when you consistently value perceived driving convenience over the life of anyone outside of a car. Councillor Holladay, I want to express to you in the clearest and strongest possible terms that entertaining such an incitement to violence and death without condemnation, as the crowd laughed and cheered at the thought of someone being violently hurt and even killed, is an unforgivable slap in the face to every victim of road violence in your ward and across the city, of which there are very, very many. Your ward averages more than 2 deaths and 12 life-ruining severe injuries year after year, and that adds up to a lot of people. You did not eject that speaker. You did not denounce his wish to run someone over with his car and very likely kill them. You allowed the crowd to clap and laugh without interruption at the bloodthirsty wish to kill someone who is perceived to inconvenience a driver for a few seconds. We ask you to do the following: apologize for entertaining an incitement to lethal violence, apologize to staff for exposing them to violent statements in their workplace, denounce the act of intentionally committing lethal road violence, and take road violence more seriously. Thank you.
Questions of the speaker? Seeing none, thank you for speaking to the committee. There are no registered speakers. Questions of staff? Any questions of staff? Okay. Councillor Chang, please go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you for this work and all the summary of all the data. It's much appreciated. I'm just wondering, when we see all this data that, for example, the residential bins replacement is one of the #1 calls, is there then a feedback action that's expected? So now we know that this is a problem. Does that, I guess, whose responsibility is it? Is it solid waste then to say, well, this is costing a lot of money, not just the bin replacement, but the staffing of 311 to respond to this issue? Do we need to look at a bin replacement? Are our bins reaching their lifespan across the city?
Through the chair to the councillor, just for some perspective on our bins, so we have approximately 1.5 million bins around the city at residential customers' locations. And when we look at the repairs to them, specifically the lids, it's around 1% of our stock, which is in line with trends. What we need to, again, keep in consideration is that these bins are approximately, on average, 13 years old. So they are past the expected useful life of around 10 years. So we are getting good value for those bins. The other piece too is that when we replace those bins, the top of those bins is the only moving part in those bins. And we do see over time that they are breaking due to a number of circumstances. They are left outside. They do get impacted by the weather. They do, hit the sides of vehicles sometimes when they're being picked up, our vehicles, and they do fall down and break. But the circular economy bit to this is that we're not replacing the whole bin. We're just replacing the top. And we do have very extensive repair and maintenance program on those bins.
19,000 requests that were created, 19,781. How many of these were done by phone?
So I pass that over to Gary.
Through the chair, the majority of them are done by phone. Approximately 20% of them are done online.
So is it $11 per phone call on average, the cost of a phone call?
For a service request, it's anywhere from $11 to $16 for a cost per
Let's say
transaction.
$14 times 19,781. So it's around $276,000 just for phone calls about bins. Is there an easier system that people could automatically pick up or do a lid somewhere? Is there a bigger way we could address this problem? Because it is a large percentage of our calls.
Through the chair, great question. I think first thing is that we'd like to self-serve.
Right.
And we are utilizing self-serve, and there's a 22% increase overall from a year-to-year perspective on the self-serve. In regards to some of the mobile applications, some of the confusion or feedback that we received on it, there'll be some changes that'll be implemented in May that will make it easier for the public to also utilize the mobile app as well from a self-serve perspective. The other thing that we're also trying to do is work on the dashboards. The overall universal dashboards, which are part of this conversation, which allow us to do further analysis and further planning to address these systemic issues.
The other question I had is when we see that the top two inquiries made were property tax and vacant home tax, is there a further breakdown when we know there's such a large number? It'd be great to know, well, what are those key questions that people are asking? What have we missed in our mass communications?
Through the chair, fantastic question, and we are working with Revenue Services to go through that. There've been a good example, even though we've communicated to the public about the timelines, still 120,000 people did not respond. So that also puts additional pressure on our system, which we're feeling today. So we are working through those trends, and we believe that the next iteration of this will have improvements as well.
And I'll just finish with this question. When we look at these trends and this data, I always think part of the response is the greater communication plan for a lot of these pieces. So if people know better about the 311 app, which we've talked about before, but also about the vacant home tax, I don't think we are reaching people as impactfully as we should be, which might cost more money up front, but could save money down the line in terms of all the redress and answers, question answering that we have to do to make up for lack of a loud and wide communications plan about major changes such as the vacant home tax.
Through the chair, fantastic point. And what we are doing is working with Revenue Services, Technology Services, Communications, and CXD to improve that level of communication. If you remember, the first iteration of BHT was not a fun one for anyone. And this second phase, much improved. So we expect the third phase, knock on wood, to show us some improvements as well. So we do have an infrastructure in place to look at addressing this. And I think what has changed or evolved from that is looking at it from a divisional perspective versus city brand perspective. So you will see incremental improvements there, and you will see improvements the next time this is released.
Great, thank you very much.
Councillor Cheng, I wondered if we could try to switch Mr. York's microphone. You've got that great radio voice, but there's some static. Thank you. And Councillor Ainsley, we'll start in just 1 second. Just going to let Mr. York take a different seat. Go ahead, Councillor Ainsley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'm not sure who this is addressed to or who can answer it. I'm looking at all of this data and, the multiple categories in that. And, I'm going to use the same example in my ward, residential bin lid damage, 701. So this information gives us the complaints or the inquiry service requests. How do we know if the amount of time it takes, for example, to fix my bin lid is damaged? I file it with 311. How do I know that lid is being replaced in an appropriate amount of time? So does this division, for example, solid waste, have a benchmark or a goal that's being met or not being met? How do I know the timeliness of the work being done?
Through the chair to the councillor, that's a great question. So the service standard on the bin top replacement is 7 days. And, it's one of those services that the customer knows that it's fixed because it's literally right at their house. And our service standards are met approximately 80% of the time on that service. And that's the service.
Oh, okay. So seven days, 80% of the time. Where would I, as a city councillor, find that information?
Through the chair, very good question, and I think that's part of the next report that we're going to discuss around the dashboards. The dashboard will have that information for you as well as the public moving forward, and that's part of the plan from an integrated perspective that we're going to deliver and communicate shortly today.
Okay, and so, Gary, so that'll be done for every division?
That will be done for the integrated divisions within 311, and I have a feeling that through motions, we'll have further conversations around an integrated experience beyond that of the integrated divisions.
Okay, and so how many divisions aren't integrated at this point, Gary?
I would say that right now.
And when you say integrated, do you mean, so like parks, for example? So I had an experience recently. I went into a rec center, and the soap dispenser on the wall was broken, and I couldn't find staff. So when I went to 311, I couldn't figure out how to file a service request order through 311 standing in a recreation center. So is that considered not integrated then?
Through the chair, that's a really good point. It is currently not integrated, but we are working with parks on an integration plan and roadmap. Part of that integration phase within parks will be implemented as of Q4 of this year. In regards to the assets and community centers, we'll have a further conversation about that, but right now we're looking at parks in particular. And that's about 1,600.
Sorry, I'm dancing around. Sorry, Mr. York, I'm dancing around a bit. Going back to, so all of the divisions that are integrated, there's a dashboard that you're going to be creating that'll have all of the benchmarking available to me as a city councillor to see on a regular basis? That's the goal?
Absolutely, Councillor. I think what you're going to see is that you will have a prototype by Q3, which we'll discuss in further detail, which will talk about the top 10 service requests, and then we'll go to the 600 categories in a phased approach. But we want to make sure that you're comfortable with that dashboard and prototype. That prototype will be accessible to councillors as well as to CLT members and SLT with an understanding of the phased approach in which the public will be privy to that in 2025.
Okay, and will that benchmarking be available, Gary, for each SR? Like I'm looking at the one chart. This is just my top 5 SRs in my ward, but that benchmarking will be available for all SR categories when I go into the dashboard?
Absolutely. All 560 of them will have that at some point in time. For Q3, we're looking at the top 10 because that's where the volumes are and activities. But in terms of the service category, our catalog that's provided in the dashboard, we'll be able to report against those into 2025.
Okay. And is that going to be available as well in an open data format?
We would look into that in a phased approach and have that conversation with technology services as well.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. I'll ask a couple of questions. Mr. York, Councillor Ainsley touched upon it a little bit. Is there a difference between the integrated divisions and then the other parts of the city in terms of how 311 takes in a call and deals with it? And could you tell the committee a little bit more about that? Who's in, who's out?
So right now, we do have some of the division heads that are here that are representing solid waste, MLS, parks, in terms of, forestry. We have revenue services as well. We have transportation. So those groups are integrated within 311, the organization, for the most part. There might have some subsets that are not. For example, Toronto Water, they're a good example, or MLS, where we're looking at a phased approach of fully implementing them into the system. But right now, they're the most highly volumed service request category that comes into the city of Toronto in general. In regards to organizations that are not integrated into 311, for example, HSI is not a group that's integrated. SSHA is another group that we are looking at integrating. Aspects of parks are also groups that are not integrated. So there are also elements and agencies that are not integrated as well. So in regards to today, when you do go into 311, the good thing about this integrated infrastructure is once you've created a service request, it goes directly into the back-end systems. In some cases, there's a soft integration in which we use Salesforce to Salesforce versus the back-end system, such as courts, which are also integrated into 311 as well, but it's not necessarily public-facing because of privacy concerns. Then there are other, for example, parks, elements of parks, where it's not integrated into 311, and if you do call 311, we refer that individual to the supervisor of that particular division.
So on the second point, if I call about a broken slide in the park, how does a call taker handle the call? What do they do? The person will first try to answer that general inquiry and try to understand the sense of urgency, safety issues, and what have you. But if a service request is needed, we refer them to the supervisor in that area. We have their contact information. That's the existing process as it is today. Having said that, we're putting together a new process, an integrated process that will be implemented in Q4 of this year with parks and those assets. Right. So by integrated, you mean that the city as an organization has a deeper line of sight from start to finish, or the life cycle of the request from the citizen?
Correct.
And so when we have that information, we can begin to measure how that request unfolds in the amalgamated requests all over the city. Is that correct?
Yes, you can't track something if you can't measure it.
Right. Now, explain to me maybe another simple example, noise. I was looking at it on the website. If I wanted to make a noise complaint about, well, there could be a couple. There could be a barking dog, or there could be maybe a noisy fan on a building nearby. Could you tell me the life of those service requests? And Mr. Grant, if you want to fill in on how that works, but I'm a caller calling 311. Can you unpack that for me?
Depending on the nature of that call, the call will be triaged to understand if it's one, controlled by the City of Toronto, or if there's a safety issue or concern, it goes to the Toronto Police Services. And once it goes to MLS, I'll hand it over to Carlton to talk about the process that's happening within that division.
So thank you for the question, and we are fully integrated with 311 on noise. We use the same back-end system as well. They do talk to each other, which is really important. So once those calls come in, it is sent to our appropriate area, animal services for a barking dog, or I forget your second example.
A noisy fan on a building.
Noisy fan on a building, so that's stationary noise. We have service standards for both of those, and we track for both of those. Noise is something we're doing really well on, and we have a 93% success rate in responding to noise complaints.
Okay. So you had mentioned, though, that there's other elements that aren't fully integrated, and I think Councillor Ainsley said, a broken soap dispenser in a rec center. And I think you mentioned that the call taker would refer the citizen to another member of staff, different phone number, and say, okay, call this person, and they'll manage their process. Would you say that there's a large opportunity as an organization to begin to tighten up that process and bring standards as they are end-to-end through 311?
Through the chair, absolutely. I think that's one of the reasons we did look at the complaints and compliments process and making it standard. So look at it from, we can either look at it from a divisional perspective or the resident's perspective, make it simpler and more seamless for the resident. So in regards to consolidation, centralization, we're thinking of the resident, making it more simple and easier for that resident to track, issue that complaint, and then see the resolution and lifespan of the actions that are associated with that particular incident or repairing of that asset.
Thank you. My time is up. Was there any members wishing to ask additional questions? Seeing none, thank you. Members to speak. Oh, okay, I'll take a moment then to speak. Reset and run the timer. Members, I do have two motions, and they're lengthy, but I'll try to summarize them fairly quickly. The first motion it's motion A, and I've circulated it, asks to come back with an approach to centralizing and consolidating all of the services and contact centers across the city. And it got right to that heart of the questions I just asked. Certain services, the really busy ones, are fully integrated end-to-end through 311, and a customer can follow up, and our citizens, I should say, can follow up and say, hey, what's the status of my request? And there's a full connection back to the program area that delivers the service. There's other parts of the city that haven't quite moved over. It sounds casual in the way I'm saying it. It's actually quite a bit of work to do that. But I think having that as a mature end state provides greater services. So my motion asks the city manager, along with Mr. York, to come back to us and talk to us about what that's going to look like to bring everything on board into an integrated system. So I hope you'll find that that report will be useful and will set up for more work and more consideration in the city. The great part about that is that we get a better line of sight into how these services unfold, and we can eventually get reports and information about that. My motion B, and we didn't talk about it as much today, but it's really setting up for additional work of the committee in our future cycles. And it asks the city manager, in consultation with Mr. York, to come back to the Service Excellence Committee with an update on something called the City Service Promise. And there's a couple of parts to that, and that has to do with the standards we all do and adhere to when we interact with anyone, whether it's a member of the public, whether it's a member of staff, or any sort of interaction. And it would be things like we would agree to call someone back in a certain amount of time or respond to an email in a certain amount of time, that sort of thing. Very generic standards. And the second half of that is around rules around interactions between the public and staff to staff. I would acknowledge on this, and it's going to the city manager because it's really about organizational transformation, and it's important. Having gone through this in previous work that I've done before being a councillor, it's not easy. But I think once we get through that journey, we find we have a better public service. So I really hope we can set up for that work and we can talk about that as a committee. I think it's something that will be positive for this organization, across the organization. So with that, I hope you'll support those, and I just will take a moment to acknowledge the work of the Customer Experience Division in 311. You are our face to the public. And I understand that it is an enormous amount of work, over 1 million interactions. Many of those are asked for information. Some of those are asked for service and for help. Some of those issues are routine, and some of those issues are very, very complex. And it's that interaction in that window that is the backbone of our public service. And I hope that we will continue to work with the staff on a journey as a committee to mature those processes even further and really set ourselves as an example in Canada, in North America, and worldwide. So thank you very much. On those items, were there any questions? Seeing none, I'll check. Any members wishing to speak at all? No? All right. On the First Amendment, all those in favor? Any opposed? That is carried. On the Second Amendment, all those in favor? Any opposed? That is carried. And on the item as amended, all those in favor? Any opposed? And that is carried. Thank you. We will now go to the second item. Our second item is SE 2.2, Complaints and Compliments, Process Enhancements. Just check my speakers list. We do have a speaker registered, and that speaker is Ingrid Boudet. Ingrid's online. Ingrid, good morning. It's Stephen Holliday, Chair of the Service Excellence Committee. Can you hear me okay?
I can. I am just getting I am deputing virtually here, so I'm just getting my calendar or my stop video. You cannot see me, I don't think.
I think we're looking at an empty living room, but...
Yes, you are, and I am here.
All right.
One moment, please. Stop video. I've started my video. Camera. Integrated camera. I'm sorry for this.
If it helps, we can hear you very clearly. And if you want to just
Okay, I
proceed
have a
with that and not
presentation.
worry about it, welcome. You've got 5 minutes to depute, and you go ahead as soon as you're ready.
I have a presentation, so I need to share my screen. So just one moment. Share. Share. Okay. Can you see that? Can you see my screen?
We cannot. We still see the living room.
Pardon me. You still see the living room. Share. Share. Okay, one moment. How about that now?
I'm sorry.
Share. Microsoft PowerPoint.
If there's a technical issue, you're most welcome to email it into the committee. We'll stop there and say we've got it.
Something here, pardon.
All right, you go ahead as soon as you're ready.
Okay. Awesome, thanks so much. I'm just going to bring this down here, and I've got a floating box. So, hello, and thank you so much for the opportunity to speak today regarding complaints and compliments process enhancements. My name is Ingrid Boudet, and I'm the founder of No More Noise Toronto, and I have a background in process design, data, and IT, so I am super excited about this project. I founded the No More Noise Toronto over 1.5 years ago after I learned that I'm not the only one who is experiencing significant health issues due to noise and was frustrated by the reporting process. I've created a data-centered approach around understanding the noise we live with by measuring sound from people's homes with meters for over 2 years and collecting crowdsourced Not 311 noise reports to fill the gaps that exist in the current process. So what are those gaps? Here's an example. A vehicle wakes us up at 3 o'clock in the morning, and our first attempt, we are told to call 311, to call the city. So we do, and we are told to contact the police because the city cannot do anything about moving vehicles. So they thank us for the data point, and the case is closed. Now, this was updated in June of 2023 that we do actually have a drop-down menu to show that it is a moving vehicle, but we still need to call the police, and if we decide to do that, either through their website or on the phone, they want a picture, they want a license plate, they want a description, and it's 3 a.m. I'm in bed. I do not have that. So both of these results go into a unsatisfactory end result. So that's why I created the Not 311 noise report. And I called it Not 311 so people were very clear that it was not the 311 report, and I still encourage people to do that. As of yesterday, we have almost 10,500 noise reports, and most of the pie chart that you see there is from single vehicles. So most of the reports are moving motor vehicles. So this needs to be fixed. Most people don't know that the city can't do anything about moving vehicles, which is one of the biggest problems. And also, we don't believe that there's effective data transfer between the city and Toronto Police Services for enforcement. So the reporting process is ineffective for most noise sources, and we have stopped reporting. So this has increased our frustration and our stress, and it's actually made the health impacts worse. I would say most, if not all, of the No More Noise Toronto members, over 1,200, do not have confidence in the city. And I know that Carlton just mentioned MLS has a 93% success rate regarding noise. I would love to know a little bit more about where those metrics come from. So what I'm really excited about, though, is the compliments and complaints process. I think this is just an amazing opportunity for both the city and the residents of Toronto. And I hope that the membership of the No More Noise Toronto members will be vocal in telling you what works and what doesn't work, because for many noise sources, it doesn't work, and we have stopped reporting. So I'm really thrilled to announce that we have a lunch and learn on Tuesday, April 2nd, to kickstart this conversation with the city. And I'm very thankful for the collaboration that we have. So I'm excited about this because I have implemented software. I've worked with the Workday HRIS system, and I know what's possible. And I'm familiar with workflows, and I know that we can build something that works for both the city and the residents. And frankly, I want to have a hand in creating a best-in-class end-to-end framework for communicating noise problems. I really do believe that action defeats apathy, and there is a lot of apathy out there. So I was really pleased when this when this committee was struck in December, because you cannot make, pardon me, one moment. Sorry, you cannot make good decisions from poor data. And CXD is looking to collect better data and move that through other divisions of the city. So let's improve city services and be more responsive to the needs of all Torontonians. And I like that you really want to build public confidence, because right now, when it comes to noise, we don't have that. So some final thoughts is the improvements that you can make downstream are limited if you don't fix the source. And so that is whether it's MLS, TPS, whether it's animal services or other things, you need to fix the source. And Councillor Holiday, as you mentioned, this is 311 or the customer service division is that public facing interface. So make noise reports easy to complete, allow for pictures, videos, and anonymous reporting, accept all noise reports. And then when you need to filter out what is in compliance and not in compliance, use filters for that. Share the information with other divisions and the public. We want to trust and have confidence in our city to protect and improve our health. A noise report is not a service request, it's a cry for help. And that can make a better Toronto by reducing noise. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there questions of the speaker? I'm going to ask a couple, if you can still hear me okay.
Please.
Thank you for speaking to us today.
I can.
Can you tell me a little bit more about the map? And it's okay, you don't have to put it up, but can you tell me a little bit about the profile of the noise complaints that you get? Just simple words, what are the types of things that people have been reporting, and where have they been reporting them? Help me understand what that picture was.
Yeah, I'm happy to do that, and thank you for the question. So the map basically started off when I realized that I could not report a moving vehicle noise complaint. And so that's where I thought, okay, well, I want to fill that gap. So it started off, it's been word of mouth. I've been promoting it through social media. So on the map, you can see that there is a concentration sort of in the downtown core, in the Humber Bay Shores, Ward 3, and it's starting to get elsewhere. But this is basically crowdsourced information. So it is mostly vehicles. There's dashboards on my website called nomorenoisetoronto.com. You can go to the Not 311 page, and you will see dashboards of what makes up the noise complaints that are there. And most of them have to do with moving vehicles. I would love for there to be more diversity, but maybe because people can report amplified sound to the city, and that process works somewhat better. I would say it's not perfect, but it works somewhat better. That's why I have less of those responses on the map.
Thank you. And my second question would be to talk to us a little bit about the information that you think the public could provide, and I would say maybe easily provide, to give your example of 3 a.m. in the morning. Where you think it should be routed and why? What would they use it for?
So the question, I'm sorry, can you rephrase the question a little bit, please?
Well, there's a proposal in here that, the city could collect information. And I think it spoke to a point that talked about information sharing between departments or jurisdictions. So what is the information that the public possesses that should be routed somewhere for a purpose? And what would they do with that information? You know, whether it's to the police or to 311 or some other official to deal with the problem. What are the types of things that, and I'm looking for the bridge here. You know, what's the bridge that needs to be built?
Excellent. Okay, now I understand that question. Thank you for that. So first of all, everything in 311 is called a service request. And I would say that a broken garbage can lid absolutely is a service request. Maybe a missed Christmas tree pickup is a service request, but a noise report is not a service request. It should also not be a complaint. It is a noise report, similar to I'm going to stop there. So it is a noise report. So to me, the branch should be right at the top before you get to anything else. Is this a noise report or is it a service request? That's the first branch. Then after that, so for example, moving vehicle, if that is what it is, then there should be a warm handoff or preliminary information collected from 311 or Customer Service Division, and then a warm handoff to Toronto Police Services. This is probably gives us the most frustration and the most angst and the most suffering, because the motor vehicle noise and the vanity noise coming from vehicles is out of control. It's at all hours and everywhere across the city. So that would be one. The second is I understand that MLS is integrated with 311. So I think that this is where more discussion needs to happen. We need to understand how to efficiently report the noise, but then also have the proper enforcement and the proper follow-up. 5 days after an amplified sound request or a amplified sound noise report comes in, that's not an applicable that's not efficient enforcement, and it doesn't work, and people have to come into people's homes. So I think we need to look at noise in its entirety and look at the different solutions for different noise sources, because they're not the same. An amplified sound on the water is very different than amplified sound on the street, for example.
Thank you. I'm going to ask my last question because I know I'm out of time because I started my clock late. People call 311 for categories of requests. Those categories could be for information. We know that's a really busy one. They could be asking for something new. You know, I would like something installed or studied or so on. And the third category could be to report something that's broken, like a break fix. Did I hear you correctly that perhaps there should be a branch right at the top that talks specifically about enforcement? Whether it's a wild animal or noise or property standards, there's a whole branch that deals with enforcement. Is that kind of the message that I'm hearing?
That's an interesting proposition. Possibly. I won't say that I am the definitive expert on that, because I think that this requires broad discussion, because I'm not familiar with all the nuances of the pathways in the city. But certainly a branch needs to be made at the top for noise, because while a broken garbage can lid is frustrating, it doesn't impact my health. And something that impacts our health, especially in today's day and age where we are all just a little bit more stressed and there's more congestion on our streets and rents are high and all of that other stuff. We don't need any more stress, and we need the city to protect our health, and especially when it comes to noise, because we do not have a defense against sound. We cannot close our ears and our bodies cannot stop listening. So that needs to be, in my mind, treated as one of the top priorities for 311.
Thank you for speaking to us. Are there any other questions of the speaker? Seeing none, once again, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
I will ask staff, I believe there's a brief presentation. Just proceed when you're ready.
We just need a moment and we'll be ready. We're ready to go? Thank you. So in terms of, the conversation that we're having today, it's around complaints and compliments. And what's really important is to understand the difference between a service request and a complaint / a compliment. A service request, is a request for a city service to be delivered or provided by the City of Toronto. In some instances, it's labeled as a complaint, but the task involves the city investigating and delivering or providing a particular service. I find that interesting because, for example, there was an article yesterday that talked about all service requests as complaints, and they're not. And what's really important is the work that we're doing today, and the conversation we're having today around complaints, is a specific type of service request. A complaint represents dissatisfaction related to a city program, service, or staff member, including quality, timeliness of service, policy, process, or procedures, or experience with staff or an agent, or accessibility of a service. Not all complaints stem from service requests because they could be something that's systemic or behavioral. What's really important is when we looked at service requests, or complaints, I should say, we looked at it from a capability perspective, and how do we re-image or rethink it from a resident's lens. So we want to look at the navigation of a service request / complaint. Clear and intuitive information and navigating provided by all channels. Right now, prior to February, there are 49 unique processes for each division. And as a resident coming in to the City of Toronto, it was extremely confusing and actually frustrating, and that trust and confidence was immediately eroded when you entered the city. Because when you entered the city, you didn't enter one City of Toronto, you entered 44 different divisions and different lenses. Through this work that we've done together with our integrated divisions as well as the stakeholders across the City of Toronto, we looked at looking at a centralized intake. We leveraged the 311 model to focus on the no wrong door through the phone, online, in person, or mail with the 5 integrated service divisions, which really meant instead of a complaint coming through an email channel, which can get lost, not tracked, measured, or resolved in a timely fashion, now you're using a state-of-the-art customer service relationship management tool to track that. We want to manage it from an end-to-end perspective, make sure that process has a lifespan of itself to track, triage, and manage the complaints, integrate into the back-end systems as well. In terms of resolution, keep the customers and the communications flowing bidirectionally. We also ensure that the training around the nuances of the tool were established, governance, so we're going to make sure that through the integrated service division committees, we were able to track and manage this, and then analysis, understanding the trends and nuances that came along with complaints, and make sure we showed incremental improvements to the evolution of this particular service category. On the next slide, it's really around scope and what was the end state versus the previous state. So we want to improve content and navigation on toronto.ca. We want to ensure a streamlined complaints process and an escalation process to the public. Access through 301's phone channels, 7x24, 365. Clear, consistent experience in a preferred language and channel of choice. So for example, when you used email, you only had one channel of choice, one language, English. We know that we're in a multicultural environment. And right now, we can use from a phone perspective, 190 languages, on an online perspective, over 50 languages. So in terms of diversification and inclusion, we want to make sure we leverage the technology and the processes that were there. A tracking number that's communicated to that an issuer. So instead of sending an email with you can't track and see what's going on with that email, now you can through this tool through the channel of your choice. We also wanted to ensure improved transparency. So when we all look at this particular process and working with the ombudsman, we wanted to ensure that there was a consistent city brand and a consistent way of communicating back and forth to our residents and the people that we serve. In phase one, we wanted to understand the challenges. What were some of the challenges? Well, as communicated earlier, 49 different divisional complaint processes. As of February in the integrated divisions, we've standardized complaint processes for the 5 integrated divisions. We have one standard, one process, one way of communicating and escalating. Missing or multi-level escalation processes, very confusing. Now we have a standardized escalation process for the integrated divisions that we discussed with our partners here today. We're also going to scale this in a phased approach, but we wanted to make sure that we worked with the integrated divisions that we have right now. Lack of centralized data tracking and reporting. now leveraging the CRM/Salesforce as a centralized record for complaints and escalations. So we can track and understand the delivery of those and addressing those issues in a timely fashion, and look at trends and nuances, and also truly understand what the public are happy with or not happy with, and make educated decisions around next steps. In terms of engagement, this was not just a CXD conversation. This was a City of Toronto conversation. We had over 150 staff engaged and participating in the survey to understand these nuances. We worked with, we took over 20 weeks of engagement internally within the City of Toronto to work with our partners. Also, we engaged with the public. We did not just make sure that this was an internal exercise. Public was also polled to understand their perspectives and insights on the methodologies that we proposed. We wanted to make sure that it resonated with the people that we serve. In terms of divisional partners, over 25 divisional partners in terms of the designing and experience standards, and talked about the enablement staff and age groups in terms of designing. It's really important about it being inclusive and extensive. So over 20 weeks of engagement, we worked over 2023 to make sure the capability was established before we implemented successfully in February of 2024. In regards to the customer experience, CX evolution, customer experience, we want to make sure that intake experience, easy to find and submit online submissions and complaints. Escalation, clear who to call for action submitting to an escalation. But also that also entails is a streamlined process that if the escalation is clearly resolved and not to the satisfaction of the resident, they can then at that point in time engage the ombudsman, knowing that the city has made that final decision in a very concerted, focused way. In terms of language of choice, we talked about 180 plus languages on the phone channel, and over 50 languages online. Notifications, status updates. The resident can choose to be notified via email or text, or just putting their service request number into the tool to find out where it stands. In terms of data and reporting, we're also able to use this particular CRM to understand the trends and nuances that are happening. So we launched in February. We have over 550 complaints through the tool. We're having an understanding of where we're going as an organization. And what's interesting, 7%, almost 8% of those activities are also compliments. So people are not just complaining about the City of Toronto, they also are providing some positive feedback. That's really a summation of the presentation at this point in time.
Thank you. Are there questions of staff? Councillor Chen.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. Is there currently an option to create a service request for noise enforcement via the app?
Yes, there is.
Is there? And are we collecting data? Because I haven't seen any data related to noise.
We are collecting data, and what's also important is based upon the interactions through the non-emergency committee that Carlton and team are part of with the Toronto Police Services. We're even collecting or starting to collect on categories that we never did before. So for example, moving vehicles and things of that nature, we are starting to collect that information to understand the severity of it.
So our deputant talked about this disjointed experience when we're trying to enforce moving vehicles, which is something that's happening a lot in my ward. And I'm wondering, you know, have these meetings with the Toronto Police and MLS and customer experience, is there a goal to map out a process that includes an integration of data as well as some kind of joint enforcement? Because we know that with moving vehicles, actually you do need both the MLS bylaw enforcement officer and the Toronto Police in order to stop the vehicle and measure the sound. So is there currently something in place to work towards that?
I could start, then hand it off to Carlton through the chair. So what's really important is through the committee, we are working with Toronto Police Services. For example, what's disjointed at times is when someone goes into 311 and then they're told that it's a police matter and they're just left by themselves to deal with it. That will no longer happen. We've talked about using warm transfers now and establish that relationship and commitment. Through this committee, we looked at really 4 themes. One thing I know that would resonate with you is around marketing and communication. So make the right call is something that we're looking at investing in, and we're investing almost $300,000 right now on that endeavor. That's a pretty good number.
A good, healthy budget.
Absolutely, and we're trying to make sure that we recommunicate clarity around what is covered by the City of Toronto, what's covered by the police services.
Because the diagram that she showed is something that I hear over and over again. I called MLS, I called the non-emergency line, and they do both. And do they need to do both? Is it, do we recommend that they actually, do we want data to be created? So I'm not expecting an answer right now, but I think the goal is clarity of process so that every person knows when they have a noisy vehicle outside their window, who should they call? And right now, it appears to me that they should call both because you want data to be created on both sides. But correct me if I'm wrong.
So thank you for the question. I'll start with, we share the same goal, the same objective, that it's clear for the public and the ability to take in these calls and to use that information. What's really important to note is that the expectation of the public is that we catch that vehicle and we eliminate the noise. That is not a reasonable expectation of MLS, the police, of 311. It's a challenge. We recognize the challenge, and we have mapping that shows historically where the loud vehicles are. It's consistent with Ms. Budai's map, and we do targeted enforcement with the police in a safe area, in those key areas like Humber Bay Shores, DVP in Lawrence, Yorkville, where we pull over vehicles, both motorcycles, and now we will be doing cars and trucks that are modified, and we will pull them over and we will test them at 50 centimeters from the muffler, and we will work towards that. So the important piece, just to reinforce, is that we have to do it with police. We work closely with them. It's resource intensive, and it's as resources are available. Police are busy doing a number of other things, and we may schedule one for Thursday evening that may get canceled, and we'll try to reschedule. But it's something we're committed to, the police is committed to, and we're working very closely with 311 and TPS and their communications people on make the right call, which we hope to make improvements for the public.
So there is a goal of a clarity of process for noise, because that one is just, it's not entirely clear at this time.
So the short answer is yes. The longer answer is we don't, vehicle noise and leaf blowers, all things that may not be contained in the bylaw. Traditionally, we haven't taken in those calls. We have now started since June. We have over 1,300 calls about vehicles. So we are getting there. We are developing a process, and we equally want it to be as efficient on our side as well.
And just to add to that, for example, there was a communication that on April the 2nd, there's a session. And we're part of that session together. And it's an education session about what's in the knowledge base and what the city can cover and what the TPS covers as well. It's not about right now changing policy. It's about communicating what the policy is today and providing clarity around expectations. Not only is it important to the public, but we're working with MLS and TPS and CXD to understand what we've committed to and make sure that we move forward on a unified voice going as well.
Thank you. I'd like another round if possible. Thanks.
Councillor Perks?
Yeah, thanks. I want to pursue a couple of things. So when the call comes in now, you've got this new process. Yes, we take the motor vehicle noise complaint. And I've heard Carlton explain, why it's not a reasonable thing to expect that in the next 15 seconds, we will have a police officer pull that car over and get them. I get why. What is communicated to the member of the public? Is it, do we say, it's not practical for us to get a car there, but we do have these regular enforcement things? Do they get that whole story?
Through the chair, yes, that's the process and protocol. And what we've also done is embedded that information in the knowledge base as well if they're looking to search it. What we want to make sure is that that same communication is coming from the police services as well. So we're working together to ensure that we communicate the exact same expectation to manage the public.
Okay, that's helpful. this call the right number? What did you?
Make the right call.
Make the right call.
So for emergency, non-emergency, or 311, and then we also want to bring 211 into the equation as well.
Yeah. As well as in some cases, if it's a non-emergency call, you'd be sending them to the other police number, which is.
Yes, the 888 number.
So if is this project that you've started, Make the Right Call, is this just telling people don't call 311, call these other numbers?
Through the chair, it's not that. It's about making sure they communicate to the right group. In the event that they do call 311, we will transfer that call to that organization as well.
That's
What the commitment is, which we didn't do before, so I just want to be clear in terms of an enhancement. Before, we would just transfer that person. That's not good customer service.
No.
So we're going to warm transfer that person. It might be a longer hold time, but that's in the pursuit of clarity and better customer service. We're committing to that. So that's part of a process improvement that you will see going into this year.
Right. And would you agree with me? Like, I've been a city councilor for 18 years. I can't always remember where the jurisdictional boundaries are and which is the right number. I think it's ridiculous to expect the public to understand that. So I'm glad to hear that we're still taking those calls and transferring. That's better. In that transfer, do we send follow-up texts saying, you got transferred, it's because of this clumsy jurisdictional thing, here's how all that works, or do they just get transferred and we're done with them?
Through the chair, we could work on process improvements, and that's what we're working with TPS to figure out that, because our systems are not integrated the way they could be.
Yeah.
So I think the first thing is to look at the possibility of integration and that flow of data. But you raise a good point in terms of the exchanging of text. At least there's a record of that. So we can look at that.
Wouldn't you agree there's a pedagogical value?
Yes.
Right? In just saying, okay, we took your call, thank you for sharing, and we transferred you. But just in future, understand this is how that kind of thing gets dealt with, and you can get it dealt with more quickly if you just call direct over there.
So, just thinking out loud, one thing I would recommend is we talk from an ITIL perspective, right? So each incident should be recorded.
Yeah.
So one would argue that if you went into the city and we've created a record, even though it's a warm transfer, we should create that record and forward that record to that individual, even though it might be closed from a 311 perspective, and clarify that it's gone to the Toronto Police Service, be it emergency or non-emergency. At least there's a flow.
Yeah.
So we can put that process into play for sure.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Councillor. Was that all of them? Okay. I'm just going to check because I can't see Councillor Ainsley. Did you have a question, sir? No? Okay. I'm going to ask a question. The clerks are going to display it in just a moment, but Mr. York, we've been talking a little bit about the first step in the complaints process, right, which is to access the 311 services about a complaint in the most general sense, right, noise. But there's also other thoughts about complaints processes when citizens may not be satisfied with the outcome of taking the first step. I asked the clerk to show it. If I could just get the clerk to scroll down. This is it's either our or internet site. I'm not sure which one, but it has the staff divisions on the left. And if you click on directory, don't do it, but if you click on that, you'd get phone numbers and the complaints and compliments. So could I ask you just to click on the city manager's office, which is a couple down? Yep, click on that. So if a member of the public today has a complaint about the city manager's office, if you scroll down, it tells you what to do. It tells you follow this step, do that step, do that step. If we could just back up one page and go to the immediate next one below that, which is city planning. If you look at there, complaints keep going below the city managers. I just picked two random ones here. Theirs is completely different. So they talk about their services and so on, and then they have a certain way that a member of the public would raise a concern with the management team to say they're dissatisfied. So would it be fair to say, and it's a long question, some of what we're talking about today is to change these processes so that they're all the same from the citizen's point of view, That they don't need to go to this directory page and say, okay, I've got a complaint about this department, so I'm going to do it in this manner.
Through the chair, excellent question. And we're absolutely making it very easy and simple for the resident to engage the city and issue a complaint or element of feedback. So we talked about those 49 different ways of complaints. That's
Right.
a perfect example of that. And now what we've done is socialize with all the divisions the expectations. So we're all aligned on each division, including the city manager's office and the DCM's office, around what the protocols are. What's also equally as exciting is that before, the city manager's office or the DCM's office would not have access to those complaints to see the life cycle of that if it was escalated.
Right.
That's completely changed. So it's one city, one process, but a phased implementation. But everyone has been engaged already through those 20 weeks of engagement to understand the expectations. For example, we have some divisions who are not integrated, they've already taken this process.
Right.
So for example, P&E, they've taken this process internally and implemented it, even though they're not integrated right now in this phase. There are other divisions that are starting to do that because there's a need for consistency.
So let's put the most generic sense of a complaint aside. People call 311 to complain about a lot, different things. This is broken, that needs to be fixed, I need this. But to take it to the next level, what are the types of things that you would envision people accessing the complaints and compliments mechanism for? What would they say at that next step?
At the next step, they can also escalate.
Right.
Which is excellent now. The first phase is before, when they've escalated, it was arbitrary. People could say yes or no. Now that resident has the ability, as long as they've issued a complaint request,
Right.
they can escalate it once in the process, online or through the phone, and follow that lifespan of that complaint. If they want to do a subsequent escalation, it gets triaged through 311 or the divisions, and in many cases, because we've already taken the appropriate steps, there's a final decision. And that empowers the division on the final decision. It also enables the ombudsman to know that due diligence was taken. So when it does go to the office of the ombudsman, there is an understanding of the process adherence and the fact that everyone has a right to be happy or not happy with the end result, but the city has done its due diligence.
So let's take a pothole, for example. I call in a pothole, and most of them get solved right away, but maybe something gets missed. A week later, I'm a citizen, and I say, what's going on here? This pothole's not filled. Or even worse, it's marked as fixed, but it's not. So I say, I want to make a complaint to the city. I want them to deal with that. They never solved the issue that I asked for. So what would be my next step under this?
Well, they actually have two options. So the first option is in the surveying function that became live in December of last year. They can actually attach their dissatisfaction to the service request that they've created. And then in turn gives us information and context around that. The second option is to issue a complaint.
Yep.
And follow these appropriate timelines for resolution or addressing of that complaint. If they're not happy with that end result, or we've exceeded that timeline, they can in turn escalate it.
Okay. Save that thought because I'm out of time, but Councillor Cheng's turn to have a second round. Absolutely.
So, as you know, language is very important to me, and I kind of bristle at the word complaint. Because why? Because we have consumers in our city. They think they're all customers. And I'll give you an example as a counselor, an email that I've gotten multiple times. Since you've been elected, crime has gone up. Cars are being stolen more in our neighborhood. What are you doing about it? Why would I get that email? It's only because they think, first of all, they might think I have a magic wand or a fairy godmother, but they think that they are customers and they just have to type a complaint to me and then I'm going to fix everything. So this mindset, it's going to creep in. It's already there, but because we have a customer experience framing and now we have a complaint framing, they're just going to sit in their cozy seats and wait for us to fix all the problems. And we know that we need them to participate in order to meaningfully bring the change that will actually produce a city where everyone has a chance to thrive. So I understand from a industry standpoint, from a familiar lexicon standpoint, it's easy to use these words. Everyone will crowd around them. But, you know, we are fostering a culture of entitlement in our own children and then our residents as well as a culture. So I guess I'm wondering, do we just have to assume this language? Can we explore a different lexicon for how people ask for better service, or even framing how they engage with us as community engagement as opposed to just service and experience?
Through the chair, so I'll try not to take too long in responding to this. But what I would say is, first of all, this is an overall cultural thing with social media and things of that nature and the immediacy of reactions.
Yeah.
Secondly, the customer's not always right. And, you know, as an organization, we need to have the courage to communicate that in a respectful way. In regards to complaints processes and what have you, they have a right to vocalize their concerns. We have a right to do our due diligence, do the investigation, and respond in a timely fashion. And sometimes they're not happy.
I like that word, concerns versus complaints. Complaints is very non-participatory. It's, I'm telling you and you fix it. And in fact, I think in parenting, we want to encourage our children not to complain, to be action-minded oriented and problem solvers. So I know this can't be fixed in this one discussion, but I'm just bringing us back to the conversation we keep coming back to, is how do we frame our engagement with our residents, and all those touch points, they are all opportunities. And the other piece is, you know, we talk about complaints and compliments, but one thing that is a wonderful pool of engagement is ideas. I get a lot of ideas. You know, I think I've heard people offer, I can help the city do process mapping. They see these gaps and they can actually tell you where the gaps are. And do we have an effective platform to take ideas in? And then to that end, is there group ideation? Because in some of our community engagement processes and other divisions, I think PFNR does it, planning does it, there's actually platforms where people can engage with each other by sharing ideas and building off each other. And that is citizen engagement. And that is a more robust democracy. And I think that we get to better processes, plans, and solutions when we all work together. And just, I wanted to add one more thing. I would love to add counselors to this list of engagement. And I know you're talking to us, but specific to this piece, that I think that we are also conduits of all the complaints come to us. And I think we have a perspective on the complaint process. But I would love to explore more about how we frame our touch points with our residents, and that it's not just problem oriented.
So lots of comments there. I can think of two responses. The first response is we are doing some work that we have to respond back to council by the end of this year on how we communicate or respond to the resident versus the customer and best practices. So that will be underway, and that we're committed to deliver that by the end of this year. So greater clarity will be established, you know, in 2024 around that. In regards to engagement with the councillors and what have you, that's the second phase. So the first phase, we know we had to get out, and there were some reasons to do that, and really centralize and disentangle this confusion around how people communicate with the city. Now, the second phase of complaints and compliments will include yourselves and others in regards to engagement, and also around part of the surveying and questions that we want to ask as well. So we will have different perspectives and maybe expand that survey capacity to include engagement, or at least in a phased approach. So it wouldn't be the exact state, but, you know, the crawl, walk, and run will happen, and you will see evolution there.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Any others for a second round? I'm going to be brief just to finish my thought. Mr. York, I was asking about the example of the pothole, and the citizen put in the complaint to 311, the initial step didn't get resolved, so they said, you know what, I want to let the city know it didn't go right. Can you tell me just roughly what happens on the journey of that complaint if it's not resolved to their satisfaction?
Through the chair, so the first thing that happens is the complaint is issued through their channel of choice. So let's assume they've used the web tool themselves and issued a self-service request. That service request is generated. It's integrated into the back-end systems and goes directly into the division. The division, depending on the process, it's sent to the manager or supervisor to investigate that complaint.
Yep.
Due diligence is spent on that complaint, and there's a service level associated with the investigation of that complaint. If at the time that it's resolved, there's a record or final decision that's made or established, that final decision is established and communicated back to the initiator, which is the resident. So they in turn are informed of that decision. If they're dissatisfied with that decision, they can escalate.
Okay?
If they're not happy with that escalation and it's a final decision, then they have the option of going to the ombudsman.
Where's the buck stop? I want to take it to the top. The pothole needs to be fixed. Oh, no, but before that.
They have a choice. They have a
Does it
choice.
go to the city manager?
We're trying to mitigate that. They have a right to do whatever they choose.
Okay.
But there's a process. And the process is the empowerment of the division, and it goes to the division head.
Okay.
And the division head has purview over that particular situation, and that's why a final decision is made, because it's gone through the appropriate step and due diligence was applied.
And the point is it doesn't get thrown in the bin. It works its way up through the senior management team, and the process maintains accountability throughout and tracking.
Absolutely.
Okay. So my very last question, and I think it's a quick one. Besides getting the obvious results for the citizen, because that's paramount, what are the other values of having a system like this? And I'll note there's an internal staff part. There's some extra things that we glean from this as an organization. Could you offer comment to the committee about the future?
Yeah, through the chair. So right now, we can get an understanding with these complaints. First of all, the number of complaints and people that are dissatisfied with these issues. We can also understand what people are happy with these issues across the city. We understand the issues that are coming along or across from an integrated division perspective, understand the services that people are happy with or dissatisfied, and then go to the appropriate divisions to look at service strategies for improvement in communication.
Thank you. I'll just do a last check. Are there any other questions? Seeing none. Members wishing to speak? Councillor Cheng?
So, as you all know, our democracy is a frail, thin thread. And we have low voter turnouts. We have people who increasingly feel disempowered. They feel invisible. They are lonely, the loneliest city in Canada. This is not a good picture of how we build a city that can thrive. And so while we look at these very important technical pieces of how we care for our communities, I think we have to pull back the lens and just consider what are the touch points that we want to have with our citizens. And framing our touch points as primarily customers and complaints is troublesome, because that is already how they feel. They already sit back with arms crossed and easily get on Twitter or social media and express their anger and frustration. And yet, when we hold a community meeting, less than 1% of the people that we represent show up for those meetings to roll up their sleeves and consider what can we do together, because the very serious issues that we are facing, including affordable housing and homelessness, the things that are for things we don't have immediate quick solutions for, they require the participation of our communities. And so I hope that in this journey of service excellence, that we aspire to community engagement excellence, that there is a part of what we're doing that is focused on empowerment of our citizens to bring ideas that we can action together towards better solutions, that it empowers our citizens to have a voice, and not a voice as a complainer, as a critic, but a voice where their ideas, their input results in meaningful change that they are a part of. So I'm grateful that we're establishing the technical tools, but I think that there is an ideological journey that we need to share together, that how we look at how we meet our citizens where they're at and bring them along for the journey of shaping the future of Toronto, that is critical to our democratic health. So I look forward to the conversations of what will happen with the nomenclature around this, but what is deeper is what is our goal and vision for how our people intersect with our city. Thank you.
Thank you. Other members wishing to speak?
I can't resist.
Councillor Perks?
I've been waiting 18 years for somebody else to say that the conversations about how we deal with this are ideological in nature. I'm just so happy. Thank you, Councillor Chang. So much of, I worry a lot when we talk about how we're going to solve problems with the community through better management of data. Philosophically, that's what we call positivism. And it's largely been abandoned because it's quite evident that people are not data points. That people have baggage and thoughts and views, and that those thoughts and views are part of a constant conversation called democracy. And if we try to reduce out value to just create numbers, we lose the whole essence of the conversation. And there were a couple of hints about how we're going to have to be careful about that in some of the things that Gary was saying. Sometimes the customer isn't right. So Councillor Holyday is asking, you know, we escalate it and we escalate it and we just keep escalating it until the constituent is happy. No, sometimes that's just not possible. And it's very obvious that it's not possible from the fact that on a number of issues that we deal with, two different constituents want two different outcomes. So when we're designing this system, we have to be willing to pull back and say the purpose of the system is not to have every single person who ever calls 311 finish their journey saying, I got what I wanted. That's an unrealistic expectation. I think a much more valuable expectation, and this was in some of the questions I asked, is that some of those journeys end with the Toronto Public Service or one of the affiliated services saying, this is the way that noise on highways works. And no, we can't get a police car there in 15 seconds. That's an unrealistic expectation in a city like this. And you've inspired me. I'm going to have a private meeting with Gary, and I'm going to get him to make sure that certain journeys end with the constituent being sent a copy of One Dimensional Man by Marcuse, which makes the point very, very, very clearly that if you aim for just this rational data view of how democratic conversations work, you will fail. Thank you. I've been waiting to say that for 18 years.
Thank you, Councillor Perks. I am going to speak briefly. I have two motions. Sorry, it's one motion, two parts. Just ask the clerks to put those up. I'll paraphrase again heavily. It's really taking this conversation and this report to the next level of detail. It's about seeing the complaints and compliments mechanism rolled out to all of the parts of the integrated divisions, and then the second part is all of the divisions citywide. And the report before us talks about the vision. This is a little bit more about the plan and the tangible results. I'm going to say a few comments, and one of them I'm going to say, Councillor Perks, is that I would agree with much of what you said and mark this point. I wouldn't go that far, but anyways, I thank you for that. This report before us is really important because it talks about our interactions with people as a city and as an organization when they've done the right step, they've asked for a service, and something doesn't feel right. And I guess one outcome could be is escalate till you get the answer that you want, but I think as members of council, we understand that that's not realistic. But what's really important is that when somebody raises an issue, they get an answer back and that it's looked at, and that it doesn't go into an inbox somewhere and forgotten about. And I don't pretend that's the way that our mechanisms work today, but there's a very deliberate approach here to ensuring that when someone feels something isn't right, that it's brought through a process so that it's looked at by the right people the next step in the process. And, you know, not everything is going to be about asking for something that you can't have and not get. Sometimes the result isn't just right, the way that it unfolded isn't just right, and people feel that they really need to bring it to the attention of the city. So getting that resolved is goal number one, and even if the answer back is a very carefully written letter that says, we've heard, we've understood, we've learned from this experience, but this is the outcome. I think that's a very, very important step, and we as councillors deal with that all the time, is when someone says, you know, I'd really like this, and the answer back is, I'm sorry, in fairness, you can't have that. Here's the reasons why, and here's the explanation, right? So that this really complements that concept. But the other piece to that, and I don't want to reduce people to data points, because they're certainly not, but what this report says is that we're looking at trends. We're looking as an organization on where, and as an enterprise, where there may be a lot of complaints, or there's a lot of new complaints, or there's a lot of unresolved issues or calls for escalation. And that's about learning about ourselves and learning about where those problems exist. And that way we can take a closer look. And what are the outcomes? It could be some training. It could be changes to our governance, and it certainly is analysis, and it's right here in the report. I think that's very exciting, and I would expect any retailer, bank, utility, anyone I'm dealing with to be doing that. And why would we not expect that our city does that? And that's not to say that we don't have 49 inboxes today and that they don't work. They do. But the point is can we bring that into a uniform process that is enterprise in nature? And, you know, I think some of us share that vision, and I think that's exciting, and that is really good for citizens, for their engagement with their city, and for their confidence in the city. So I hope you support the motions. With that, anyone else wishing to speak? Nope. Okay. On the one amendment, all those in favor? Any opposed? Item is amended. All those in favor? Any opposed? And that is carried. On to the third item, SE 2.3.311, reporting and dashboards. I'm just going to check, Madam Clerk. We don't have a speaker on this one, correct? Okay. There's not a presentation, but I think, Mr. York, you wanted to display the reporting and dashboard.
Perfect. So what we want to do is there was a motion that was put forth last time we met to have an integrated dashboard that articulated the trends around the service requests, delivery and performance from an overall perspective of the City of Toronto and also from a ward perspective. And what we're able to do with our integrated divisions and partners, because this is not just a CXD conversation, it's a City of Toronto conversation. And this, for example, shows each type of service request category per ward and the breakdowns of it in terms of the totals. What's really important is we want to use information, which is really important at this point in time as a baseline. Granted, people are not numbers, but we want to try and have a baseline of where we start from. So, for example, the ask of the motion was to provide a dashboard and ensure transparency, accountability, and performance. And through our approach, what we wanted to do was provide councillors with an understanding of what's transpiring in their wards. So, for example, if you can go to the next slide. That gives a synopsis, first of all, from a service request perspective of everything that's happening in the city, broken down by sections or services. So councillors, when we do move this to the prototype level, will be able to experience this information and dive into it in greater granularity. overall from the City of Toronto. The next synopsis of that is what's happening in the ward. And for instance, we chose your ward. And what's happening in that particular ward broken down by service request categories. What's equally as important. That was the ask of the dashboard, to understand what's transpiring in your ward. The other aspect of it was to understand all the types of services that are provided by each division. So what we wanted to do was provide a service category, or catalog. So all of the 500 plus categories that are within the City of Toronto broken down. So we did do that, and that's what's here as an example of a snapshot. So you can see the type of service request and the service level that would go against that particular threshold. So for example, if it's 4 hours, 3 days, so on and so forth, and we have MLS as an example. So we said, for example, you have MLS, illegal dumping in city parks. There's 2 days to respond to that. So as a counselor, you would understand that service level. As a resident, as a business, as a visitor, you would also understand that service level. The next part of that, which will happen hopefully towards the end of this year, is to report back on the performance of those top 10 categories that are happening in your ward. So you'll see the performance against these issues. So the resident will be informed of the nuances and trends that are happening in their ward and understanding how the city is performing against those particular initiatives. Now, the city is not perfect, and there are going to be some opportunities for improvement. We'll work together to address that in a timely, effective, purposeful manner. And before we can actually make this a consistent dashboard that's public-friendly, there's work that has to be done. And part of that work is also articulated in this report. There's behavioral things that we have to look at around completion rates, closure rates, making sure the data is properly inputted, making sure that the front end, CRM, the back end, Maximo, are also fully integrated in speaking, because that makes it seamless for all the organizations. A great example in which this work is happening in a very, very proactive way is with our partner in transportation. We've done some tremendous work with Maximo to look at an improved experience. We did some tremendous work with transportation to look at emergency management and making sure we clearly manage that expectation versus what happened in the previous years. That division is also training their staff to input the information in a much more effective manner. We're also working with our colleagues in technology such as Sonia and Marco to make sure that the Maximo information, that experience, is actually robust. And what that means is, towards the end of this year, we worked tremendously last year to make sure the flow of information goes back from Salesforce to Maximo, the assets, so on and so forth, the pictures are there. By the end of this year, we're hoping to have a situation where it goes bi-directionally. So you've sent us a picture of that issue, of that asset that's in distress. We're going to return you a picture of that repaired asset. That's the best customer experience that we can provide. So not only will that be a better experience in the tools and bi-directional, but as a counselor, as the public, you'll be able to see this dashboard, the activities that are transpiring in your ward or the area or your community, and understand the service levels and performance that are happening. And then we'll work together as an organization to make incremental change where deemed appropriate.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Questions of staff? Okay, Councillor Ainsley, please go ahead.
Thank you, through Mr. Chair. Thank you, Gary, for this work. I think, the dashboard is going to be well received by everybody. I just wanted to go back on our earlier conversation about, so on the dashboard, I see the column for service standard. I'm trying to understand, will we also be able to see corresponding data around, the service standard gets, the target is 2 days, it gets hit. The target is, to hit that 80% of the time, and it only gets hit 75% of the time. Will that data be available to us?
Through the chair, we want to be transparent, so that data will be there. And then we'll also be available to talk about actions and activities that we're taking as a group to improve that performance in an incremental manner.
Okay. And I'm also very, I'm very looking forward to, and I know we've talked about this before, about closing the loop with residents, and you send a picture in, and potholes. I'll use that as an example. Is I send one in, a picture of a pothole, and it goes to I get an SRO, and then I move on to something else, and then a week later I'm like, why is this pothole still here? I thought it should have been filled. So I'm looking very forward as well to the work you're doing around closing the loop and in including a picture of the finished work. I think I hear a lot of that from residents as well. So looking forward to that's coming into play as well. And then my last question, sorry, just timelines around when the dashboard is going to go live for us.
Through the chair, we're aiming to have a prototype established by the end of Q3 of this year around the top 10. And when we come back to this particular committee, we'd also work with a roadmap and a plan to implement that accordingly, and also tie it to the technological tools that we have to fully integrate to make sure it's automated. So right now it would be more manual, and we'll make sure that the primary initial goal is to ensure that councillors have this information, as well as members of SLT and CLT. And then we look at a phased out rollout to public once we've done manage the actual nuances with the integrated bidirectional flow of that data. And we'll post that on 311.
Okay, and can you ballpark what your timeline is for that?
I need until at least our goal is to come back by the end of May with a ballpark for that. Just need a bit more time to socialize this. I don't want to overcommit and underdeliver.
Yep. Okay. Perfect. Thanks, Gary. Appreciate all the work. Thank you so much. Back to you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Questions? Councillor Cheng.
Thank you. I find the service standards very enlightening. Some are up to 365 days. I'm just wondering, when people make a complaint or a request for service, do they get the service standard built into the system that it tells you FYI?
Through the chair, yes. So when you do issue a service request, part of the communication is the service level's expectation comes along with that issue. Now, we don't respond with the percentage of completion or performance, and that's why this dashboard is really important, because it really then does complete the end-to-end journey.
Great, thank you.
Any other questions? No? Okay, I'll ask a couple. Mr. York, Councillor Cheng brought up the service request catalog. This is relatively new, is it not? I mean, it's not that we've never seen the data, but having this before us.
Through the chair, yes, it is.
So do I understand this right? I don't think this is all of the services we do in the city, but this represents like an organization of the things that people call about. And so when someone makes a call to 311 or writes to 311, everything that people ask for can be sorted out in different ways under it's almost like a taxonomy, right? It's this department, this is the request, this is the sub-request. Do I understand that right?
Through the chair, yes. And what we're trying to do is work through even simplifying that process.
Right. And so everything that someone asks for has some prescribed service standard. Now, we can debate all day whether that's the right number, but it's a starting point. Is that correct?
Through the chair, yes.
And so the proposal here is that for the services that you've identified, and they're not exhaustive, but they're a good chunk of the services in the city, there's an opportunity now to look at whether or not we met the service standard. And then you're going to let councillors know, and where we go with that information, we go with it.
Through the chair, absolutely correct.
If I was not satisfied with a service standard, how do I deal with that? You know, it says, I can pick any of them out here, but there's MLS, illegal dumping in city parks is 2 days. I think it should be 1. What do I do?
Through the chair, I'd say there's a budget process that we'd have to go through.
I see.
And look at the cost implications that come along with adjusting to the service level that you think is appropriate, or council feels it's appropriate.
Now, if the report comes back and it shows that, my goodness, they got, almost every request dealt with within 2 days, how would I think about that? Would it be fair to say, maybe the budget process is working out and that things are appropriate? Conversely, if the service standard is never met? Would that be a flag to me that maybe I should think about the budget process around that?
I would say, through the chair, I would say that it's an opportunity to reassess and relook at things. It doesn't necessarily mean it's a good thing or a bad thing, but it facilitates further conversation and analysis.
Right. And have we done this before as a city?
This is the first of its kind to do it in this way. That's why we want to make sure that we crawl, walk, and run, make sure that we use the appropriate data sets, and we manage the appropriate expectations.
Now, there's 13 pages of things on I didn't count them, but there's a lot. Is there potential for more parts of the city to be added to this list at some point in the future?
Through the chair, that is part of your motion
Yep.
in terms of consolidation. So we are looking to add that. And the one thing that we're looking at this year to add are parks and to that equation. So yes, you will see some improvements there.
And maybe the other thing is it's 13 pages of things, but would it be fair to say that a handful of them represent the vast majority of what people call about?
That's why we talked about the top 10, yes. I think that's a very accurate synopsis.
And so if we're going to be logical beings in a council, we might want to start with the busiest things.
Through the chair, yes.
Okay, wonderful. It's a technical question, but the service standards, I noticed some of them are in days and some of them are in hours. I like the idea of hours, but is there a way to standardize the number so that we can say, sort the list?
Through the chair, we'd work with their integrated service divisions to come up with the standard because we want to have one city language in that way versus multiple. So we'll work with the best way to do that and come back and report it to you.
Fantastic. Thank you for answering my questions. All right, members wishing to speak? None? Thank you, Councillor Perks. If I may ask the clerks to display my motion. Time. So again, a motion asking for some additional reporting. And what we're asking for here, I'm suggesting that we ask for, is to come back with a bit more detail and a plan about a new reporting system that looks at those performance indicators for the 311 integrated services divisions, right? So what we see in the appendix. And some suggestions on framework for future reports so that we can see things like trends, seasonal or cyclical issues, or geographic patterns. And that has started in this report. To come back with a prototype report so we can see what it's going to look like. And to also look at the top 10 service requests in each of the categories so that we don't have to look at 13 pages of numbers. But we start with the ones that are clearly at the top of the list and are likely going to be the most issues of concern. So I hope you support that, but that also sets forward some of the work for the future of this committee. And with that, again, I think this stuff is really exciting, and I think it's prompted some very good conversation today. But, you know, we're seeing things, some of the things for the first time in a report in a very, very organized and logical view about services. And look at that. We've got a service catalog that represents the things that we do as a city. It describes them and organizes them, and it also suggests to anyone that looks at it what our target is. So do we meet the target? We probably do in many cases. And if there's a pattern of not meeting the target, that's a bigger conversation, right? Sure, there can be a complaint made, but as a council, I think we have to look for systemic issues or systemic concerns. And I'm suggesting in my motions that we go further than that and look for trends. The world changes around us. Expectations aren't static, needs aren't static. But using the information that we have before us, we can start to anticipate those. And I think it makes for a better governance process, a better planning and budgeting process. And this, to me, is exciting. Ultimately results in better service to citizens. So I hope you support those motions, and I thank everyone for their reports today. So on the amendment, sorry, I'll check. Anyone else to speak? Nope. On the amendment, all those in favor? Any opposed? That item carries. And on the item as amended, all those in favor? Any opposed? That item carries. That is the conclusion of our business for today. That was the final item. Thank you to members of staff, the clerks, to the members of council. Have a great day. Meeting adjourned.